All right, so hi everybody. It's May 6th. So a couple days ago, our young and energetic and not very experienced, kind of crazy Secretary of Defense uh, kind of put out a word that he wants to reduce the number of four stars in the military by 20% and overall 10% of the generals and flag officers. So, and yes, and there's probably room for cutting. Now, as is typical of people, they'll say, "Well, back in World War II, there was one general or flag officer for what the heck was it, 14,000 people or something, and now it's like 1,400, something like that, or was it one general for every 6,000, and now it's 1,400." Okay, now back then, because of the low technology, uh, everything was simple, a simple, basic combat power. We had ships, carriers, destroyers, frigates, submarines. And on the Army side, the Marine Corps side, we had the infantry, we had tanks, we had artillery. Helicopters weren't there. That was not a yet available dimension. And of course, the Army Air Corps, they had the bombers and fighters. But nowadays, uh, okay, so let's just go back. So now there was no U.S. Army Europe back then officially, but you could say that Omar Bradley was the U.S. Army Europe commander. Okay, so there's parity there. There was no official European command, but you could say that General Eisenhower was the EUCOM commander. So there's parity there, and under each of them there was a slew of generals as staff and deputies and stuff like that. Now there was no AFRICOM commander. It didn't exist. Right now, it's a Marine four-star, and who probably has a deputy as a three and a couple, one or two other one or two-star generals. There was no Central Command, the Middle East with all that mess. Right now, it's a four-star. I don't know by which branch, and they have a deputy, maybe a three-star, maybe a four-star, and a slew of two-stars and one-stars. Um, there was no official Pacific Command, but you could say that those type duties were split between General MacArthur and Admiral Nimitz. Okay, so I guess you could say there's parity there. And under each of them, they had different admirals and generals. So there's parity there. There was no Southern Command, uh, but nowadays there is. There was no North Command, responsible for the defense of the continental United States. Um, There was no, now within the Army, there was no Army Futures Command. There was no Army Futures Command. The Army's newest command, headed by a four-star down at Austin, Texas. Now, the Secretary of Defense wants to recombine that with the Training and Doctrine Command. Now, it split out of there a few years ago because the bureaucracy of being with the Training and Doctrine Command, it just slowed the development of future ideas for the Army, for stuff. And so they split it apart. Yes, and they added a four-star and some kind of deputy and some kind of other kind of generals in there. So that's a new one. Um, there was no Army Material Command per se, but somebody was in charge of manufacturing all the stuff the soldiers had, and testing it. Uh, and there was no transportation command, which is a four-star somebody, probably Air Force, responsible for the military sea lift command, the Army surface deployment and distribution command. Um, there was no and the Air Force, Military Airlift Command, I think at the MAC flights, Military Airlift, all that falls under Transcom, and that didn't exist back then. Cyber, there's a cyber command overarching the Army Cyber Command. I'm sure there's a Navy Cyber Command. I know there's Marine Cyber of some name. I'm sure the Air Force has a cyber. Uh, but then, of course, because it's split now, Space Force has to have some kind of cyber command. So that there was no need or possibility of that back then. Uh, they didn't have a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Oh, they did have the Joint Chiefs, General Marshall, Admiral King. And that was basically it, I think. But now they have the 4-star with the vice chairman of the Joint Staff is a 4-star. And of course, within the Joint Staff, there's J1, J2, J3, J4, J5, J6, J7, J8, J9. And I don't know if it goes any further than that. So each of them is chaired by some level of general. I'm not exactly sure what they add to the equation. They do something to combine the capabilities of each respective services things. I don't know what they. I really don't know what they do, but they exist now. So there's a lot more. Oh, the missile. There was no need for the Missile Defense Command. They didn't have all these missile bases like the one up in Greenland, which is now part of Space Force. It used to be Thule Air Force Base. Now it's some kind of Space Command base. So no, that's commanded by a colonel who just got relieved. Okay, they didn't have the command that's based in Cheyenne Mountain, and it escapes me what that is. That's our Nuclear Defense Command. So there's a lot of things that just had no concept or need to exist back then, but now they do it because everything is so nuanced. So back then it was just get the infantry out there, get the tanks out there, get the planes out there, get the ships out there. But now they have all these other combat multipliers. There was no Defense Intelligence Agency. No need for that. So now the SecDef, he can't go crazy on cutting these generals because if the world is simply more complex than World War II, you really cannot compare the need for generals today with the need for generals back then. It's just different. It's more complex, and that's all. Oh, now just for giggles here. Now a 4-star, he said less generals and more troops. Okay, now just for giggles, at the base pay, a 4-star gets $197,302 a year, in addition to housing and food and aid and all these other things. Right? It's probably up to $300,000 worth of value at this. But then an E2 gets $27,000 in base pay. So right there, if you got rid of that general, you could have 7.2 other E2s, with their guns. So in theory, yeah, you get rid of a 4-star or a 3-star, you can certainly afford to hire more enlisted personnel. Now back to the E2 there. I know people on the internet, they talk about how low pay they get. Well, let me just say this. That E2 gets $27,000 in base pay. In theory, they could get, if they lived off base, okay, so their housing is free if they live on base. Their food is free if they live on base. Their health, their medical and dental care is always free. Uh, Lordy help us. Okay, and so that 27,000, if you throw in some dollars to those free things, they're like at $65,000 right out of high school. Okay, so all these people who talk about how low pay when I was when I was in E2, I had all kinds of extra money. I had no responsibilities, no bills, you know. Like my brother said, you used to, you go out there, you get your stereo and a car and all this fancy stuff. Then you're broke. But if you just be and have some fun, not get tied up in buying stuff, you're living large as an E2. So I really can't stand the people that talk about how badly paid the enlisteds are. Yeah, they're not going to afford a freaking worldwide cruise, but who can? You gotta be working years and years and years and years in the civilian sector before you can afford a cruise like that. So let's just be real about it. But anyway, so again, so yes, there is some validity. Yes, less generals, more troops. That's possible, but more the generals now. A lot of them are absolutely necessary due to the complexity of the world today. Uh, and quit slamming the pay of the enlisted people because it's really not that bad considering where they are in their stage of life. They have yet to go to college. They're young, probably not. Most of them aren't married. So just it's great. It is.